And welcome back.
How we doing? As you can see right now, we're joined by a man who puts me to shame in terms of his beard. How about you introduce yourself?
My name is Steve Cantwell. I'm an American stand-up comedian known for storytelling.
So,
I grew, yes.
go on, go on.
Uh, I grew up in a peculiar way. I was a Mormon preacher for a very serious Mormon preacher until I was 40 years old or so. I had um, I've had kind of a tough life. I've not had an easy life. My family actually emigrated from Ireland in the 1800s from Kilkenny and joined the Mormon Church and took a sailing ship from Liverpool all the way to Louisiana, which was how people got to America before there was railroads and Ellis Island and whatnot. So they showed up on the banks of the Mississippi River essentially and built hand carts, which is just basically a big push cart that you load all of your worldly belongings into, and you and your family just push that push cart in a westerly direction until you find Salt Lake City. And there were hundreds of people that were in that wagon train, and they made their way to Utah, and that's where I was born. I was born in this little town that my family stole from the Indians in the 1800s, and my entire life I'd never really done anything. I was all set to live a kind of a sleepy life until I had a business partner that killed his mother-in-law for the life insurance money. And I turned him in, and the government put me in witness protection, and I ended up in Alaska. They sent me to Alaska just to get away from things while the trial happened. And while I was in Alaska as a Mormon preacher, I decided that my friend, who was a sergeant in the Army, convinced me that it would be a good idea that he had been hearing about this thing called, I guess it was artificial marijuana. Do you guys have artificial marijuana in Ireland? Do you have, they call it spice here.
Yeah, we've spiced.
No?
Did we?
Okay. Well, so he had been hearing about spice. He didn't know it was called spice. It was when spice had just come out. And he had been hearing his soldiers talk about this artificial marijuana, and the Army did not test for it. And so he asked me in a letter, he said, is this something that maybe the Mormon Church has a blind spot about too? Because he wanted to be able to, when he came home for Christmas, be able to smoke fake marijuana with me. And we'd have a great time. Our kids played together, and we lived right next door to each other. Our wives were friends, and he just thought it would be the greatest thing in the world if he and I could celebrate the fact that he was home for war for Christmas by going down into his gun room and smoking some marijuana together. So we planned this out over letters back and forth from Iraq. He tells me, it's legal in every head shop. Go into a head shop and just ask them for this legal marijuana, and get a big bong and get all the accoutrements, and then we'll have the greatest Christmas ever. So I do that. I go into a head shop, and I ask the head shop, I say, I'm looking for this stuff. It's not marijuana. It's perfectly legal. My friend said they sell it in all the shops, and she said, salvia? And I was like, yeah, that sounds right. So she sold me 20 times concentrate salvia. Do you guys know what salvia is?
Haven't a clue.
Okay, well, it's an extract of a sage plant that the Indians smoked here, and it's a powerful psychedelic, and I had no idea. I thought that I was buying fake marijuana, and instead I bought a powerful psychedelic that was, for some reason, and still is, perfectly legal in the United States. So I buy a giant
Before
bong.
we go on any further,
Yeah.
you were very quick to say that your family stole land off the Native Americans. Not many Americans would be willing to say that.
Yeah, well, I have all their journals, and unfortunately, it's absolutely true. I mean, we pushed into the West at a time where there were no roads. We were the first white people out there, and it started off as a very pleasant, almost partnership with the Native Americans, and then it very quickly uh, turned into a very ugly um, situation. You know.
Yeah, ugly it was definitely.
Yeah,
Now
and
we
unfortunately, they were responsible for the extermination of an entire civilization of Indians that were in North America at that particular
yeah
time. You know, and I struggled that for a lot of years, the guilt of that. But then I just, I've told this story so much, I really had to kind of compartmentalize that and just say, well, that was them, and I'm just the guy
yeah you have to remember that
descended from
wasn't
them.
you.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know.
I'm just the guy telling the story.
Yeah, and it's telling a story is the best thing you can do. Like even with a
Yeah,
lot of things to do with we're looking back on history these days, very in
yeah,
depth, and there's no one alive. Well, mostly there's no one alive who was involved in these things, and all
yeah,
we can do is tell the stories of what happened. But
yeah.
you brought up being a Mormon. I don't. Thomas, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think we have Mormons in Ireland.
Um, I'm technically and not allowed to correct you, Jared. It's in my contract.
We we don't have Mormons in Ireland, as far as I know.
I I think you do. They're actually not called Mormons specifically. They call themselves the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And they just, two guys in white shirts usually ride bicycles around and knock on your door and talk to you about the Book of Mormon. And I've known people that have served their mission in Ireland is the reason I say that.
I've been not lucky. Well, maybe lucky. I don't know. I've never met them. I live in a very small town. But
What town do
could
you
you
live in?
just give us a quick brief on that? County Offaly.
Okay. The Mormon Church was started in the 1800s by a 14-year-old farm boy named Joseph Smith, who made up a story that he found that an angel showed him where a golden Bible was buried on his property, that he was able to dig up, that no one was allowed to see except for him, and God told him that he could have as many wives as he wanted, essentially. And if it was cool with all of his friends, then they were allowed to have as many wives as they wanted to as well. And so essentially, it was a sex cult that this kid started in the 1800s as a way to try to get out of manual labor. And the interesting thing about cults, and something that I've learned about getting out of the Mormon Church, is at the top of all of these religious organizations, there's usually an atheist in charge, because only an atheist would make up stories. Only somebody who knows there's not a God would make up stories about having hung out with him. So but they say he sent emissaries to all parts of the world, but even back in the 1800s, and they sent missionaries to Kilkenny County, Ireland, which is where they encountered the Cantwell family.
In where?
James
Sorry.
What's that?
Well, what county?
Kilkenny.
Kilkenny.
Kilkenny. Yeah.
Oh, all right. I didn't know. Sorry, I thought it might have been smaller. This like cause there's
when
like
people say it here, they say it with such a thick accent. It's probably not even what it sounds like for everyone else.
No, that's fine. Yeah, no.
Oh,
Kilkenny.
okay.
Yeah. All
Okay.
right.
Yeah. So they emigrate. They go to Liverpool to get to find passage on a ship, and then they find passage over there, and find their way into the Salt Lake Valley, which is in Utah, which nobody lives there, and they slug it out with the Indians. James Sherlock is my ancestor. His whole family makes it on the journey without incident. And then his first week in the camp of Salt Lake, he's building a sod house for his family, and he designs the chimney incorrectly. And his first night that they have a fire in the house, the chimney starts fire, and everyone gets out except for his wife, and his wife dies in the blaze, and he can't forgive himself. He feels like he has dragged her into this adventure, dragged her out of her comfortable home in Ireland, and has killed her out in this wilderness of America. And so he goes a little bit mad with grief. He's got all these kids that he can't take care of, including a pretty newly born baby. So Brigham Young, who was the head of the Mormon Church at that time, takes his kids and gives them to different families who he can take care of them, and he sends my great-great-grandpa up to this next township over in this next valley where there's a terrible Indian fight going, because my grandpa is suicidal, and he just wishes to die in the service of his God. And so Brigham Young obliges him and sends him up to this terrible Indian war, where he goes fully expecting that he's going to die. But they don't die. They build an Indian fort, and over the course of probably a decade, they have this terrible war and do terrible things, and live through it. So at the end of this time, they have this whole valley that these 20 or so men can divide up amongst themselves, and my family is one of the beneficiaries of that land grab. And so that land just gets passed on from father to son and subdivided amongst all the children with every generation. And I find myself in a situation in this little town that I grow up in, where I'm literally within a few blocks of every member of my family, both sets of grandparents, both sets of great grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, everybody. So it's like I grew up in Cantwell town,
Yeah.
But nobody ever left. Nobody ever leaves this little comfortable burg that we're at, and until I do. And I've never been back.
That's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
That's rough. And have you spoken to your family since?
Oh yeah. And that when I quit the Mormon Church, which is we'll get into how that happened.
Yeah.
But they went through a rough patch with it. There are several members of my family that don't really talk to me anymore and have kind of disowned me. They all had a rough period with it, but two of my brothers and my sister found their way back to having a regular relationship with me now on the new terms that my life exists under.
And I just want to go back to the Irish heritage part.
Yeah.
They leave during the famine.
No, I think they missed the
before.
famine. They left before the famine.
Okay.
Yeah, they just narrowly missed the famine, and they narrowly missed the Civil War in the United States.
Yeah. Well,
So they didn't
I
get
suppose
conscripted into the army.
Yeah, they were lucky in that regard, in both those regards. But have you really thinking now with the story with the Native Americans and the land grab? It's so bad. But
So
stuff
bad.
like that happened all over the world. Europeans were doing it to Europeans for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And then they
And
found other parts of the world to do it too.
Yeah, and the Irish were victimized for centuries.
One of the first countries to experience colonialism was Ireland, with the Protestant. What were they called, Thomas?
Goddamn British.
Yeah, that's it.
They set up colonies. They didn't call them colonies though.
I don't know.
Come on,
Shit, man.
use your brain.
Oh,
You haven't spoken on a podcast.
Yeah, man. Well, technically, you say under the contract. No, right.
The plantation is what they call it.
That's it. The plantation.
There we go. That was a horrible part.
No,
of
budgery.
history. Yeah, that was rough.
Make indentured servants out of the Irish people, essentially.
Yes, and some people have the gall to say, like that was nothing. Like, well, I know when people talk about the Irish slavery thing, there's a lot of mixed feelings, but these people were basically forced into it, and just because it had an ending didn't mean it wasn't periodic slavery. And
it lasted a millennia. It lasted it was 1,000 years of being subjected. And think of the hopelessness of that. If you were born Irish in the last 1,000 years, that you had no choice, no help, no hope. Essentially, you were just basically a servant.
The English have been here for a long time. But anyway, we're past that.
Yeah, we are. Thank fuck.
Like, not just Europeans did this stuff. The ancient Chinese.
Genghis Khan,
similar stuff. Genghis Khan. The Ottoman Empire was absolutely terrible at it.